he told me, he goes, I think you're onto something with the social media. He goes, just pitch me a job. He goes, I just want to do something with you. He goes, pitch me a job. I said, I'd love to do a 5-day-a-week podcast. He said, done.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Off the Track. This is a daily racing form podcast where we're going beyond the past performances and the handicapping. We want to know how people got to where they are today in the racing industry. And our first guest, Jason Beem, is track announcer, host of the Jason Beem Horse Racing Podcast. We get to talk with him all about the challenges he's had in his life, the ups and the downs, the struggles, but the roller coaster getting to where he is now, calling the races at Tampa and Colonial. So Jason Beem, our first guest on Off the Track. Excited to be chatting with my good buddy and the voice of Colonial Downs, the voice of Tampa Bay Downs, a man you hear talking many times on the Jason Beem Horse Racing Podcast, usually in the different role. What is it like for you now on the opposite side? You're usually the one hosting and playing the host role so often nowadays.
Yeah, it's weird. I have to yield control to you. So
Right.
I'm your servant here, Gino.
Well, I appreciate it. And I always love chatting with you, buddy. So when we talk about racing, I always love asking people, how does it start? Because getting into horse racing is a little different. It's unique. It's not necessarily like, you're at school with your buddies, they're playing baseball, everybody gets into baseball, something like that. There's usually like an origin point, someone that maybe takes you to the track, that shows you around. How did you get started getting involved in horse racing?
Yeah, I was very into baseball as well. That was
right. I knew that one, right?
That was our thing. But yeah, my dad played college baseball, and I grew up. I mean, since I was a little kid playing baseball. But my dad was who took me to the track for sure. I was born like 3 miles from where Longacres was, the old Seattle track back in the day, and we grew up probably 5 miles from there. And so we used to go. They would run all spring, summer, and into the fall, and we would always go Thursday nights and then Sunday days. My dad would usually Thursday night. We would usually just go for the last 2 races because they stopped charging admission after the 6th, and so the 7th and 8th you got in free. But yeah, just I loved it as a kid. It was time with him. I would go play on the toys in the back of the grandstand, and then I'd hear the call to post and run out and watch the post parade. And he taught me some pretty basic fundamental handicapping stuff. My favorite jockey was Gary Boulanger,
Nice.
who was the leading guy at Longacres when I was like 9, 10, 11. But Gary was always on the favorite. So my dad always called me a chalk hound since I was, yay tall.
That's I was going to ask, because it's funny. I remember my grandpa, biggest chalk player you'd ever meet, my Nanu. He was a numbers guy. So he was like a lot of 4-7s. He would play off the board. Like he didn't look at past performances almost at all. He was one of those real old school guys. But then my dad, total opposite. Like when we were growing up and I'm going to the track in Santa Anita in Southern California, for me, my dad, one of the things he taught me, we're trying to beat bays in Northern California.
Yeah.
Right. So like my dad was very much the opposite. He's hit big pick sixes where you'll see his pick 6 ticket. He doesn't have one favorite all the way through the 6 races. So I always think it's funny, like my grandpa, my Nanu, total chalk player. And I was going to ask you, like, do you remember some of the early things that you were taught, or some of the things that like dad passed down to you as we're talking about angles? You mentioned Boulanger was a jockey that you played in, but it's so funny remembering some of the early things like around the track that you learn or that kind of stick with you.
My dad's big thing was first time Lasix. He used to have me go through the program and circle all the first time Lasix, and then I had to go to the Valley Daily News, which was our local newspaper, and Victor the Predictor Cazzetti was the local handicapper, which is the best tout nickname of all time. Victor the Predictor. Yeah, Victor just passed away a couple of years ago. I actually got to know him a little bit in later years, but he so I would cut out Victor's picks and we'd take those 2 things to the track. And the first time, I don't know if it was the timing, like when, I don't remember when Lasix kind of came around and began being published as a thing, but that was a big one for my dad was for, and it's funny because like I almost never even consider it anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Don't even think about it. But yeah, that was a big one for him. And yeah, for me, I was so enamored with jockeys that was usually my big thing. Like it was who Boulanger was on. It was who, Gary Bay. We had a lot of Garys. The Gary Stevens, Gary Bays, Gary Boulanger, like back to back were like our top riders up there. And so for me, it was a lot about the jockeys and names and stuff like that. Like my couple favorite horses were Captain Condo and Grandstand Gabe. And they ran 1-2 in the Space Needle handicap one time, and it's pathetic that I still remember this, but the
Yeah.
exacta paid $44.20, and I hit it for $2, and it was like, $44 when you're 10 years old is more money than I was ready to tell my parents I was moving out. So it was yeah.
Yes. So we get into racing a lot of the time. And like you said, you're playing a little bit, you're having fun, you're watching your dad, you're having tips on it. You start getting a little bit older, and then we start, playing the races a little bit more. When does the announcing bug kind of get in for you? Like, when do you start thinking about like, wow, that would be cool? Are you someone who's at a young age, like mimicking and practicing announcing, stuff like that? Or was it later in life when you thought this might be something I'm good at?
It's both. When I was a little kid at Longacres, Gary Henson was the announcer, who was Harry Henson's son, and they had he basically used his dad's style. Here comes Captain Kendo on the outside, and I loved him. Like, when our neighborhood where I grew up, if you ever want to look up Index Avenue in Renton, it was like a perfect oval. And that with Harrington, I remember. But so I would go home after the races, and I would ride my bike around, and I'd whip the bike, but I would do the calls. And so I was enamored with that, but I never thought about it as a job. I wanted to be a baseball player. I got away from racing because Longacres closed when I was 12, and so we didn't have local live racing for 4 years. And there was simulcast was kind of a newer thing. We used to go to this place called the Off Track, which was like a warehouse where you could bet Santa Anita and Yakima Meadows and stuff like that. But I really did get away from it for a while. Baseball and friends and growing up just took priority. And when my dad got sick in 2000, I started going with him on weekends because my college was like 30 minutes away. And he passed in 2001. And after he died, I kind of kept going. We went to the races probably 3 or 4 days before he passed. That was like our last time doing something together. And so after he died, I just kind of kept going. And I was in the Quarter Shoot Cafe at Emerald Downs. Sally
Love it.
Steiner.
Sally. Yeah. Shout out to Sally.
Oh, the best. But Vic Stoffer's American Oaks call of 2005, I think it was, Cesario. I remember the hair on my arm standing up, and I went and bought binoculars the next day. I was like, I could try that, and not knowing any, like, I knew Robert Geller because I had worked there the previous year, but I didn't have any industry connections. And I messaged Vic on trackchampion.com, one of the old forums. And Vic gave me this like 3-page letter about what to do for practicing, kind of how to get into it. And so I started practicing up at the grandstand at Emerald. And then when Portland would start in the winter, I started going down there and practicing. And I was there. I'd go every weekend. It was a 2.5-hour drive and getting rained on and, cold weather and everything. And January 8th of 2006, Mike O'Brien, who was the announcer there, they would let me, I would go sit in the Equibase room because it was raining outside.
Yeah, when you say practicing, so you're going there, you're calling the races just from like a different spot.
Put a tape recorder on your shirt and binoculars and your program. You're like, awesome. I color the program and do the whole thing. Because Vic and a guy named Greg Boomer Rye and a few other people, they all told me, like, you have to practice live. You can do it on TV, and I like racereplays.com. I used to practice calling off of that all the time, but it's so different doing it through binoculars. And with TV cameras being better now, you can get away with doing a race on TV, but you do miss a fair bit of it, and especially if the field's really strung out, then you definitely can't. So I know some people that use the TV maybe more than they should, but back then, especially, like, you really had to not use it. I use the TV for fractions just because at Tampa, our fractions, they round them up to tenths. So it's just remarkably confusing. And Colonial, they're too small for me to read with my naked eye because Colonial were way up and way back. So it's a different view. But, but yeah, as far as just practice, I mean, it was going up on the roof, and it was so fun. Like, I really didn't think, my whole thought, I didn't know how to, like, get a job. I just thought I'd practice, and they let me call a race, and it went okay. I forgot to breathe because I was so nervous. But they let me do one a couple more a few weeks later, and a couple more a few weeks later, and that was when I asked Vic if he knew anybody that was hiring, and he said River Downs, Great Lakes Downs, and there was one other one. And so I sent tapes off to all of them, and somehow River Downs hired me.
I think for me too, growing up, like, mom and dad met each other at the track. We would go to the track. We were involved with, like, owning horses, my non and my grandpa and my dad. But I always, like, it seemed like I couldn't get a job there.
Yeah.
Right. It was one of those things where it was like, oh, it's fun. It's my hobby to do. But I never really thought, wow, I'll be able to do something like this for a living. It's like a dream, right? You hope to do it. And I remember when TVG came into play, right? And like watching it on TV, really like a network that was just dedicated to it, being like, wow, there's actually like opportunities there for things like that. It just seemed like a world that you couldn't really get into, but
Yeah.
you had not an in, but just someone that you asked, that you talked to, and that they gave you a little bit of advice what to do. And that's really what it's kind of comes down to, right? Just getting sort of pointed in the right direction by the right person.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have any family I mean, my dad was a gambler, but like, that
Yeah.
didn't have any. He didn't. I never knew anybody in the industry, and so
Yeah,
I'm a big believer in you kind of got to create your connections in that way.
absolutely.
And Robert Geller and I used to talk about this a lot when I was at Portland and he was at Emerald. Like we felt very geographically detached from the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And Robert has a funny story of when he applied for an opening at what most would consider a pretty big track. The person doing the hiring was like, "Where's Emerald Downs?"
Yeah.
And he was like, "Oh." And then when they told him no, they said, "Well, we'll keep practicing. You got a future in this." And he'd been doing it 25 years and called Hong
Before, I was
Kong.
like gonna say
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Years at all
So
different tracks too. Oh my, like
but it was kind of true, like, because when I went to River Downs, like, you could go to Churchill and you could go to Indiana and you could go to Chicago, all within a couple hour drive, and you could network and meet people and kind of put faces to names. And obviously the internet broke that open, but before that, we were kind of on a little island where we
especially the
were at.
West. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
the
yeah,
West Coast in general, really.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
Because you get the Southern California tracks, you get Turf Paradise. There's no more Northern California now.
yeah,
There was for a little while, but it's not as easy as it is to ship around places for
yeah.
horses or for people even, right? You see track announcers on the East Coast. We've seen it happen. You go there, you can fill in at other different tracks, and it
Oh
gives you
yeah.
the opportunity to move up the rankings there, kind of move up the level. So you talked a few times about baseball. How far along did you get with that when you were pursuing it? I love watching you. You go to all sorts of baseball parks and minor league stadiums when you're traveling around for different races and different stuff for work. How far did you get along with baseball, and what was sort of the reason? What did it stop? Was it, you just got to as far as it could go? Was it a physical thing? A lot of guys have an injury that kind of takes them out of it. And when did that kind of transition to getting back into playing the races a lot more and
Yeah.
going to the track again?
Yeah, I was a good high school player. Like I was second team pitcher and second team first base for our league, and I had 2 junior college offers, one at Green River College, which was our local college, and one at Feather River Valley College, which was kind of near Reno in the California side. We had played in a tournament in Reno, and I threw a shutout one game, and the guy
Nice.
literally
Saw you
was
on a
like,
good day.
yeah, and I was a junk baller. I didn't throw a lot of heat, but I had broken my wrist when I was 14, and kind of a la rookie of the year. Like when a cast came off, I had a big deuce that I could
Nice.
throw. But yeah, I was just I was a decent control pitcher, but I was a good hitter and played first base and DH quite a bit. And it got to the point. My dad, because he played at Washington State and he was all Pac-8 and all that kind of stuff, so he was good, and he wanted that for me so bad, and I just was kind of done with it by the time I finished high school. And so I just wanted to go to school. So I went to the University of Washington. I was a good golfer too. And I had made the state tournament in golf, and Gonzaga had said I could come walk on, but that was like $25,000 a year back then for tuition. And so I was like, I don't know about that. But my dad really wanted me to do sports in college, because for him, that was like the best time of his life. And so I just wanted to go to school. So I ended up going to the University of Washington. And so my baseball days came to an end. And as far as the races, like I was totally away from it until he got sick, and then when he got sick,
back.
I would drive him and take him to the track. We would sit up if you go at Emerald, you go up the escalators right to the left, there's a bar right there, and we would sit there. And the last time I went to the track with him, like he had his oxygen tank in, and we're playing the race. My aunt showed up, and my aunt was winning, which was driving him insane. And I remember my dad has a bit of a morbid sense of humor. And I remember my aunt had hit a bet and he had lost. And I looked over and he'd taken the oxygen cord, wrapped it around his neck. And he made the comment. He goes, anything's got to be better than watching her win. And so, but yeah. And then, like I said, when he passed, I just kind of kept going. And I had gotten real into poker, and kind of right before the whole Chris Moneymaker thing broke. Sure. And there was a great library of poker books at the time. And you kind of had that realization of like, oh, I can learn this and get better at this. And for about a year, I was doing really good at poker because, again, that poker boom hadn't hit yet, so it was still a lot of people who were just firing and just going to gamble and stuff like that. The games obviously got way better after people. I mean, they were actually really juicy for a while, but then once people started learning, it got tougher because everybody was kind of reading the same info. And I went to law school a year after college, and that was when I got more into the horses, and I found it interesting. I also hit a couple of decent scores, which that's one of the things with exotic betting I think can be both great and also troublesome, is that you get sucked into that, and
you think you're one away always.
Well,
you're just one day away.
Yeah, and to some degree you are, but
Yep.
I didn't know at the time, but like as hard as it is to make money betting the horses, it's harder doing it with pick fives, and because you're playing against better players, it's harder to do. But you don't know that when you're 22, and so I was like a big trifecta player, and I was a horrible trifecta player. Like I was just spread city with chalk on top. I never got any real education on how to play the races until after I'd stopped playing the races for the most part.
Because when you're taught early on, it's pick the winner.
Pick winners,
right?
That's the book. The book is picking winners.
Yeah, you're picking winners, and then as you get a little bit older, right, then you're trying to get more value into it, right? You're getting bigger price winners, but then when you move on to other exotics, you get a little more scared, right? So you want to play it a little safer on top before you spread out a little bit. So completely. It's you get older, there's probably meeting the right people that put a little birdie or two in your head that are like, oh, wow. Or you read the right book, right? Or you hear the right person say something that's what I think helped me so much in the age of social media, being able to read and hear other really smart people talk and just kind of be a sponge and absorb, right? Because I've never been the type of person who I'm going to listen to someone and I'm going to play blindly what they bet. Right.
Yeah.
But all the time. And a lot of people do. But what I love, and I think the best way to use shows like your podcast or any race previews or anytime people are talking about races is, hey, did that person say something that maybe wasn't on my radar?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe now do I take a second look? Do I add another horse onto my ticket, right? Do I maybe readjust how I'm looking at the race, but not necessarily just change everything? There have been a lot of times I've been helped by somebody giving me an 8 or 10 to 1 shot that I didn't have on my radar that I threw into a pick 4 or a pick 5 that really helped me out. And so I completely feel that. And like for myself, I look at what I was doing 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, wow, I do feel like now I'm playing in a much more efficient way. I'm playing in like a much more like disciplined way.
Yeah.
And one thing I love about following along with you, listening to your podcast, reading your book, you've been really open about how hard it is in horse racing, just in general, like to win, right?
Yeah.
Being a baseball player, I love comparing it to baseball because the absolute best, like Hall of Famers, are losing 70% of the time, right? If you're hitting 300, you're awesome. And it's even less in horse racing, like 25% of the time, you're amazing. So that means you're losing 75, 80% of the time. It's such a difficult game mentally. And for you, there was a time period where you just said, you know what? I love racing. I love sports, but the gambling part is too much. And you documented it in your book, Southbound. For those of you who don't know, sort of a little bit, but it's a fantastic book that just sort of goes like it goes through what we go through as gamblers, the highs, the lows, some of the feelings. And man, there have been so many times where I thought, I don't know if I can do this anymore. I don't know, like it's been a bad week or 2 weeks or a month or 6 months or 8 months or whatever. And I love how honest you've been about it, how you were able to kind of get through, look at it. For a lot of people, I think they wouldn't have been able to stay involved in horse racing.
Yeah.
Like something like that. Just kind of talk through a little bit about that and what that was like for you.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I had zero discipline back then when it came to betting. I mean, I was a total action guy, but also I just had no proper education about it. I'd read all those books and stuff. So I had the handicapping education, but there really was never anything about betting. And like, I look back at old bets and they're just horrendous. I mean, they're just so, big boxes and spreads, but with all the logical horses, because again, it comes down to that picking winners mindset. And and I've been pretty public about my anxiety struggles over the years.
Yeah.
And it became a little bit of a distraction. Like, if I dive into the forum or if I go game, like, at least I'm not focusing on how scared I am or how or whatever it is.
Mhm.
And so I got to the point where I was just playing too much for someone who was not making a lot of money. I mean,
Yeah.
Portland Meadows ran 2 days a week, and I think I made $250 a day. So you can do the math about what kind of money I was making. And I mean, the beauty of Portland back then, Portland was the craziest little town. I knew people who worked like 7 hours a week at a coffee shop and like had their own place. Like, it was,
And they could afford it. Yeah.
It was the weird. I think my rent when I first moved there, I had a room and a bathroom and everything. It was like $400 or something like that, and it was like a nice house. So those were different times. But no, I had no discipline, and I was not a smart player at all. And it just got to a point where I'm like, why am I doing this? Because I never got into debt. I just never saved any money.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, you turn 30 and you're like, oh, like I still have the same $2,000 in my checking account that I've had for the last 5 or 10 years. Like, what's, and like, I have a career, like I have health insurance now. What am I doing?
And you're lucky, because for a lot of people, right, it does go down deeper than that, where they're way deeper. They're losing money. They're betting money that they can't afford. I think one thing that helped me also, which was sort of weird, is when I started working for tracks, for TVG, for places, and I had specific tasks. I have to look at these races. It kept me more focused on looking at less races overall and just like more hardcore for the ones I had to go talk about on TV. Cause I wanted to make sure the few times I missed something, I'm going to be let know about it. If you ever make any little mistake, you're going to be let known about it. So I wanted to always make sure I had way more than enough information for the few races that I had to cover and I had to talk about. But man, like I just love that you've been so honest and so open, especially in a sport where and in a time period where it's been easier nowadays, but 10, 15, 20 years ago, if you bring up mental health, you're a wuss, right? You're like, that wasn't something that, especially as a guy too.
I didn't know what a panic attack was when I was diagnosed with them. Whereas now I feel like most people have heard about.
Yeah. And so just hearing other people talk about stuff makes it so much easier for all of us, because all of us have some sort of mental health issues that we're dealing with in some way, shape, or form. And I love knowing that for you think, you're gambling, you're having fun gambling, and that stops, but you love racing so much you're able to, be disciplined then when it really mattered most and say, okay, I can still be involved in racing. Let's see how I can be involved in some different way. So for a while, you're trying to be a track announcer, but as we're pointing out, there's not a bunch of jobs. There's not a bunch of opportunities in horse racing, right? It's sort of difficult for you to really break through. You have a job at River Downs, you're working at Portland Meadows, but not necessarily any like bigger tracks that are running all that often. Like, I'm sure you're probably interviewing places and probably sending tapes in a lot. That probably felt like a struggle right there too. And it seemed like there was a while where for you, I feel like social media and getting to know you, getting to know like the humor, like a little bit of a different side of you, I feel like that may have opened some doors for you, because that was like seeing you, how funny you were, and getting the Beem Awards and doing all these things on social media. People, I think, took a little bit more notice of you and took notice of your sense of humor, the talent that you have, the knowledge that you have, and just the love that you have of racing.
Yeah, I mean, the social media thing certainly helped. I mean, I'll be the first to admit that. The Portland years and the River Downs years, it's like going to River Downs was so exciting because it was like the first time I'd ever lived somewhere else, really. And, they ran 5 days a week, and it was like 100 days, and it was, it was just my first time kind of on my own. I think I was 25, and I was making $1,100 a week, which at the time just seemed like a fortune. And we got paid every week there, which was great because, like, you could, the first check of the month was the rent check, and the rest of them all went to going to Churchill Downs every off day. But I mean, and I was eating out of Jeff Ruby's once a week. Like I was living, because like I didn't have any kids, I had no car payment. My whole bills for the month was like $600. It was great. So those years were good, and I'd never had depression until my second year at River Downs. And so that was, my struggles had already started, but I kind of was doing okay. And then I had a period where I wasn't. And so I left River Downs I had just a bad start to the 2008 season with that stuff. And I went to the hospital after. It was the Big Brown Derby. I watched from the hospital room because I was just in a bad way. And they, my mom came over, we drove back home. So I left, I told him, I said, look, I just can't do this anymore. I got to go home and figure out stuff. And right when I got back there, Portland Meadows offered me a year-round job, which was great because I was closer to home. It was, health insurance, all that. But Portland, I was there for 8 years total, I think. And, I loved Portland as an area, and like the track there was fun, but like it was just a bad time in my life. And so it's a weird, there's good memories, but there's a lot of bad too. And yeah, I was out of announcing because I took a job at Louisiana Downs. I was doing a little better. That would have been late 2014, early 2015. And that was the first Beamy Awards, was late 2014. And so I did that. I think it was the week after I'd accepted the job, but they hadn't announced it yet at Louisiana. And I remember I almost didn't do it because I thought, do they want some guy who's doing this kind of goofy crap?
Yeah, right. It's like a shtick, gimmicky thing.
Because it was just the whole thing was like, I thought it'd be funny. Like it was supposed to be just
it was a
funny
show. Yeah.
And it took off pretty well that first year. And then I went to Louisiana Downs and I just crashed and burned with the anxiety issues again. So I was there for just the quarter horse meet. And I had gotten an interview at Emerald because that was the same year Geller got the Woodbine job. And so I got the interview at Emerald, and I don't like to fly. So I drove from Shreveport to Seattle for the interview. And the first thing they said in the interview was, they're like, yeah, we're really hoping like some new people and women and other people apply for the job. And I'm like, oh, so I'm not getting the job. And they hired Dinnerman sight unseen. Yeah. And obviously they've kind of been proven right as he's gone on to do very well. But I remember at the time, like being real jaded about that, because that was the dream job, was to call my hometown track and the Long Acres Mile and all that stuff. So I was real heartbroken about that. And so I called Louisiana Downs. I said, I'm not going to come back. I'm going to stay home. And I was out of announcing that would have been spring of 2015. And I never called another race till the end of 2018 when Pete let me fill in at Gulfstream. And those interim years, the first year I just did Uber and grocery audits and some, part-time jobs. And I decided to do the Beamy Awards again, even though I was kind of out of racing, and Bet America had seen them, and I applied for a job with them doing something else. And the guy, Pete Laverick was his name. He called me and he said, you might not be a fit for this particular job. They actually ended up hiring Michelle Yu for the job I had applied for. But it was like a VIP job. And so she, and you needed to go around to like all the tracks and host parties, and I didn't fly. So I wasn't a good fit.
Yeah.
But he told me, he goes, I think you're on to something with the social media. He goes, just pitch me a job. He goes, I just want to do something with you. He goes, pitch me a job. I said, I'd love to do a 5-day-a-week podcast. He said, done.
Awesome.
And so, he offered me a salary and told me, I remember he told me, he goes, if 50 people tune into the first one, we'll be happy. And I think it was like 280 tuned in or something like that. And so he's like, we're doing great. And so, yeah.
What's nice is with what you do too, it's Bick and like you, right? That do
at the
like
time.
daily,
Yeah. It was DRF had the Players podcast. It was Bernier, Mike Hogan and Kinchin, I think maybe, or Fornatel or some mix of those guys. They had just started a little while ago, but it was like a once a week thing. And so my whole thought was, I started right around this. I mean, literally around the exact same time as Pardon My Take. Yep. And that was my, I really didn't even listen to it, but I just remember that was kind of my thought of like, look, we're going to do song parodies, game shows. Let's do some just wacky, fun stuff along with interviews and some analysis
and serious stuff
like
too.
That.
Yeah.
And so that was my guidepost. And they were, like I said, Bet America was great because like they were totally hands off. Like I pissed off big time a few jockeys with some song parodies, and like we had cease and desist letters, and they never went. I like a month into it, I upset a jockey and his wife, and it was like the most harmless. Like I still to this day don't know how anybody could hear the song lyric and like get mad about it, but they did. And my boss, the guy who owned Bet America, John Ford, he goes, this is like the most mild thing ever. And I'm like, I thought I was going to get fired because I'd been there for a month.
You're all nervous. You're new.
They don't want this kind of stuff. But my boss goes, that video has 3,000 views in 24 hours, which in horse racing was pretty
huge.
Good. Yeah. So he goes, who cares? And so they were always really, really cool. And so when Churchill bought Bet America, I remember thinking like, oh, I guess this is done now.
I'm done.
9 years. I think I'm the only thing left from old Bet America.
Yeah.
Being
Look
honest.
at that. And
Yeah.
that was where you were able to talk to so many different people at all levels of horse racing. Probably that you never even expected, like all these different interviews that I've heard. There's so many different people that I never knew until I heard them on your show.
Yeah.
And I heard their story, which I think on top of having fun, you're able to tell stories for people at all different levels. Because for you, you started at River Downs, you worked at
Mhm.
Portland Meadows. You're not like a big track snob
No.
or anything like that. And
No.
I'm when my first jobs were when I was working shifts where I was covering thoroughbred, harness, and quarter horses on the same shows.
Yeah, yeah.
I've always said 5-1 is 5-1.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter where you get it, right? Like I can play that 5-1 at the highest level, at the lowest level. And you've done, to me, an incredible job of being able to shine a light on people in all different places. And I think that really, like, you, after a couple years of starting to do the podcast, and then, you know, even as it carried over with Churchill, with Twin Spires, it just seemed like it just continued to grow and grow and grow and grow. And it became like, for so many people, something that they were, you know, setting their notifications on, that they were tuning into, because you were doing a really good job of having fun, but also some serious, little bit of gambling too, a preview of some race. Like it got I don't want to say variety show, but my thought always when I was on, you know, air, it was, I like to have fun in addition to being the serious, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to just be the gimmicky guy. I don't want to just be the guy that's goofing around. I want to be someone who can be taken seriously, but also have fun. I think you've been able to straddle that so well through the years with the fun, but also when it's time to be serious, you know, it's time to be serious.
Well, and it's a weird line to walk because, you know, I'm sponsored by the ADWs and the tracks. And so it's like, you know, I am PR, right? I'm not news. I'm not, you know, so I've always, but I like to talk about those things. And so that, you know, you certainly have to learn the line to walk, because, you know, my job is to promote horse racing. It's not to be, you know, overtly critical or anything like that.
But you don't want to be a phony for your audience.
No, and that's the thing. I always kind of joke, like, if I have to kind of toe the company line or whatever it is like that, or the industry line, like I try to lay the sarcasm on thick enough to where hopefully people know. But you know, it's, I don't know. Like Churchill's been awesome to me. So I get, some people have their issues with them for certain things and whatever, but like they've done nothing but treat me great and give me a great platform. And so I'm very thankful in that respect. And there's been a couple guests they've told me not to have on, and it was really just because there was major conflicts of, you know, business stuff. Yeah. But like, you know, other than that, I mean, I've been able to have on pretty much whoever I want to have on. And I think that lends to, my whole mode of broadcasting is kind of the Howard Stern style of like, look, I'm just going to be open and honest and let it rip.
Yep.
But if the audience doesn't connect with, because all this stuff, writing the book, doing the show, it's all about connection. Like that ends up being the end all be all for me, because it's like, you know, you go to the track and you get to talk to people, meet people. The microphone's the reason I get to do that, right? Because I've connected with these people. So if they don't make a connection with the host as a person, I don't care how good your information is, they're not going to stick around 4 days a week and come back.
Absolutely. And, they can't tell you're real. And you're very, very real. Like that's one thing in listening to you right away. Everyone can get that sense. So of nowadays, you get to be the voice of Tampa Bay Downs. You're calling the races at Colonial. You've gotten to call some pretty good horses through the last couple of years too, right? Like how cool is it now when you watch the Kentucky Derby, or when you're watching Grade 1 races or Breeders' Cup races, and you're like, oh yeah, I called that horse. And like, who are some of the ones right now, like over the last couple of years, that were like some of the big horses that you might have called that you can remember through maybe Tampa Bay Derbies or Arlington Millions now at Colonial and some of those big races?
The funny thing is like a lot of times it's with Tampa, it's the Chad Brown maiden special weight, like Gina Romantica or Bleecker Street or stuff like that. That will go on to have, and we've seen it at, I mean, Integration. It wasn't his debut, I think. No, it was his debut. He won his debut, and then he won the Virginia Derby at maybe it was the second start. I forget, but whatever it was early. And like, so those ones are always very cool. And we've had, Nation's Pride won the Million a couple years ago. It was a super, super nice horse. And I remember Travis Stone and I started announcing like 2 weeks apart. I started April of 06. He started May of 06. And so he and we kind of have gotten to be buddies over the years. And so, I always joke that his ascension was a straight up rocket ship to the top, and mine was more of a little peg over to the side here. But I have a lot of gratitude about my journey, because I think it makes, because these were the kind of jobs I aspired to. I never saw myself as a NYRA guy or I just haven't. I don't. And so for me, I wanted to get to call at good tracks with good people in good places and make good money. And so like, I'm so like, I've always said, like, I have no aspirations as far as like bigger tracks than where I'm at now, because I just think they're such good fits for me. But there's a lot of gratitude in that, all those winding roads, because they end up kind of finally paying off. So I think I'm just a little more not that Travis isn't grateful to be where he's at, but just that, I always use that as a joke example. But
we've hit on a few of your current peers and colleagues. You've got a good group right now of some track announcers out there too, and some people that you mentioned. Who do you now, and you kind of pointed out when you were young, people that you listen to, who are some through the years that you've either admired, and maybe one or two nowadays that you look at and you go, wow, he or she is doing a fantastic job. For everyone, for me, growing up, we all had our Trevor Denman.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, oh yeah.
Everyone's got their Trevor, but like, who are some of the ones that you looked at and you'll remember, and maybe one or two now current that you look at and that you admire?
Yeah, it's funny because growing up, like, I was way more about our local guy than I was Tom Durkin, or
sure.
I concur that Tom Durkin is probably the best American announcer ever. Like, and some of that is opportunity, right? Like,
getting to call the big races and the big moments.
But he was really good.
So, like,
I don't have any problem saying that. But he was never my guy.
Same thing on the West Coast. He just wasn't as much. I was always a Trevor guy.
So like, but like I said, I love a lot of Tom's calls. Like, I think they're fantastic. But like Gary Henson, like I said, as a kid, will always nostalgically be my guy. Robert Geller was, because he was our local guy, but he also was a mentor. And like, the first time I really told anybody I was practicing, like, I gave him a tape to listen to, and I can still see him, like, with the headphones on, just go, yes, okay, yes. and then tell it, like, he told me, he goes, you need to keep practicing this. Like, he goes, you can do this. Like, he was real encouraging. And he's outstanding. And, I talked, he just celebrated his 10th anniversary at Woodbine, I think. And
which is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I made a post about it, and somebody said, they go, my only beef with him is I hate when, like, at the 8th pole, he already knows who's going to win, even though it's like completely still he reads a race. I think
he's fantastic,
better than anybody, or as good as anybody. Vic was always a big guy for me back in the day, which is funny because my style's not his, is so bombastic, and that's like, I want that from Vic. Like, I want Vic and Pete at a big race to just be going bonkers. But like, and it's funny because like, that's never been my style, but those are always the guys I like to hear from.
Almost because it's like, it isn't your style.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
It's completely. A little bit of like that you don't have, right?
Yeah. 100%. And because I always get asked, like, who's your like, not mentor, but like, who do you like influenced? And it's a weird thing because like, you listen to everybody, and
so you
really
like a little bit of each, right?
And there's like,
and then you make your own.
Everybody's kind of doing the same thing. I mean, there's little differences in style and intonation stuff, but I mean, in the reality, you're going dink, 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 dink. And then, but like, to me, the aspirational guy that way is Dave Rodman in Maryland, just because I think he's so good and he's accurate, and he does mix in some humor once in a while. I try to be pretty straight, with the exception of like, because if I do something funny or silly, I want it to really stick out. Whereas if you do it too much, because Luke Kreitboss told me early on, he's like, he called me after a race because we had a 50-1 win, and I was going, he's 50-1. He goes, you got to remember, 95% of the people out there just lost money. He goes, so you got to be careful with that. He goes, it's a story, and he goes, it's the story. He goes, but you can't like rub it into people. And so I always hear him. We had like we had a 78-1 at Colonial one deer, and the horse like took off like a rocket on the outside pass, and I go, it's so and so, and he is 78-1. And I just somebody in the comments said, God, could this announcer have been less excited about that? And I was like,
they didn't have that horse.
That means I did my job. Yeah. Oh yeah, that. But Yeah, so Dave Rodman to me is kind of the aspirational of. I mean, I think he's into his 60s now, and he's still just sharp as a tack. Because unfortunately there's a lot of guys, and you hit 62, 65, your vision starts to get weaker, and your brain isn't as fast, and it's a fast twitch job. And so, I told my financial advisor lady, I said, I need to be set by 62 because you don't know what you can do after that. So,
and in racing in general, but couple jobs you're pointing out, track announcer, and then when you're on air, especially when there's live, you can be the best gambler, handicapper, and that's a different set of skills. Once you go on air and you have to try to you have to try to get your point across, right? Communicate to people who may not understand at the highest levels, to communicate to people from all different places, but also you don't want to talk over their head. You don't want to come like you're dumbing it down too much, right? You want to hit like a point right in the middle. So I've loved seeing, like, watching you through the last 10 years or so since you and I started getting to know each other. It's just amazing to kind of follow along with how you have some ups and downs. As you're saying, you're in a moment where you're struggling a little bit, looking for some jobs, thinking like I could get one of these jobs. Like I could get one. I just need the chance, right?
I had given up on announcing because when I left, I'd left River, I'd left Louisiana Downs, both in the same circumstances. I was anxious and depressed, and I couldn't do the job. And so, I was once I had the podcast, like I was pretty convinced I was never going to get an announcing job again. Cause I had applied for 3 or 4 jobs, probably more than that, between Emerald and Turf Paradise was open at one point, and Thistle at one point, like a bunch of jobs, and never got a sniff. Presque Isle at one point. And so I was just kind of, under the assumption, like, okay, this is not happening ever again. And because the anxiety had got, like, the 2016 set, like those were bad years. And I'd gone up to like 440 pounds. And so, like, I was just in no place to go move around the country and do the job. I couldn't do it. So, hindsight, I'm glad I didn't get any of those jobs, because it just would have blown up again. And it would have been the same pattern.
Wouldn't have been the right time for you.
Yeah. Miramati used to call me the John Sadler of announcers. He goes, "You're great at home and you're terrible on the road." But oddly enough, the year Sadler won with Accelerate in Churchill was the year I started back announcing. Pete invited me to Gulfstream Park West to fill in for 3 weeks for his vacation. And I drove cross country. And for me, it was like, I just wanted this was my opportunity to end my announcing career on my terms. And I remember the first day, I've never been more proud of myself ever. Like I was nervous, but I got through it. I remember calling my mom in the parking lot and bawling for like 20 minutes, just cathartically, like,
I did it. I can do this.
Yes. And I remember my mom just sitting on the phone. She's like, just get it out. Just get it out. Like, she just kept saying that. And a buddy of mine, side note, I remember telling that story once, and he goes, "You're like the 10,000th person to cry in the Calder parking lot, just
different reasons."
But yeah. And so when that was done, I remember like thinking, oh, like, maybe I'll start doing more fill-ins or something like that. And I mean, a week or 2 later, it was announced that Frank had gotten Santa Anita, and he said, "What would you be interested in applying to do the Monmouth fill-in for me?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think so." And I had kind of started that. 2018 was a big turnaround year for me. I'd started losing the weight. I had been dating someone who was real good about kind of pushing me out of my comfort zone. And
was it a lot of little things, or was there like one thing that you remember? No. Just like little things, all kind of.
Yep.
Yeah.
I did what's called exposure therapy, and essentially you just expose yourself to the stimulus that makes you anxious. For me, it was public places, it was crowds, it was heights, it was a lot of stuff. So when I started losing the weight by walking, there was a bunch of guys on Twitter that had a Saratoga steps contest. And if you walk 10,000 steps, you entered in your for that day. And at the end, whoever won it got like a $200 bet at Saratoga. But it was just enough of a motivator. And it was like, once I started walking more, I started feeling better mentally. Yep. Like, walking was the best mental health thing I've ever done in my life.
Just
like,
getting up, getting around, moving.
Yeah. And so but anyway, so yeah, like, but that made me feel more comfortable in crowds, because like I just felt more strong and sturdy. And So I would go to the mall and walk around for 5 minutes and then go home, and then 10 minutes and then 20 minutes and then so on. And then I'd go to the Space Needle after a while. And then I got in a plane, which I hadn't done in 15 years, and just started doing more and more and more and more, going to concerts and ball games. And what happened was, instead of like, originally it was terrifying going to do all these things, but then it became comfortable and then it became fun. And
Yep.
once it moved to being a fun challenge, like then it became like a turn on in a way. And so, and the more and more the opportunities started to come, like with Pete's, like when Pete called me about that, I just remember thinking, like, my whole mantra was like, I just got to say yes to everything. And so I was like,
Yep.
yeah, I got to do it. And I was so nervous driving. I mean, the whole drive, I remember my girlfriend at the time, I was like, this is going to go okay, right?
Yeah.
She's like, yeah, it's going to be fine. And so it was really a cathartic experience. And right after that, like I said, I got the Monmouth fill-in, and then I got Colonial like a week after I got the Monmouth thing. And Colonial was strictly because Jill Byrne had seen the Beamy Awards, and she was running Colonial now. And Merv Huber, who was our analyst the first couple of years, he told her, he goes, he's a race caller, right? And she's like, really? Because she didn't know Portland Meadows.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was, and then it was just a series of fortunate events. And oddly enough, Margot, who was my boss now at Tampa, like, she had heard me at Monmouth and at Gulfstream West. And so when I applied there, she had told me, she's like, I was glad you applied. I remember hearing you there, and I was hoping, so,
that's advice for anyone listening to this or watching this. That's one bit of advice I give to people. And as we're talking about not trying to be a snob for higher jobs or different tracks, you never know who's watching or listening.
Oh, for sure.
You never know when you're doing something that's on air, that's a broadcast, that's a recording. You just never know who is watching or listening. And there are so many things like what you just said from years before that somebody saw me on a random night on TVG when I said something nice, and they remembered it years later, or just said something positive, or I picked a winner of a horse. And that's one bit of advice I always give out is, when you're on, take everything seriously, because for some of the people that are watching and that are listening, that's the most serious thing in the world that's happening, right? And it kind of goes like what you were saying with what Luke said about how you celebrated with the race, right? At all levels, there are people that are going to be really excited. There are people that take it seriously. There are people going to be sad by it. So you want to make sure you're not just poo-pooing things, right? You're not just like, oh, I'm better than this. I don't like watching the broadcast and feeling like the people on there think they're above something. And you have always embraced and had everything that you do. And I think it really comes out when you're calling the races, with your podcast, with the interviews, when you're just having fun online. You just seem like you're at such a really good headspace right now, compared to where you were a decade ago, right? If you're talking about it's not even comparable, right?
Yeah, no, I know. And it's funny. I never say I'm cured of anxiety issues, because I feel like it's one of those things that are going to ebb and flow. I had a bit of a medical issue a year or two ago, and it really triggered back a lot of those old things. But I also now know how to deal with them and how to work through them, and that I'm not in any danger and all that kind of stuff. And, I don't know. It's just like anything. You learn and you get more experience, and hopefully you just try to get better at things.
And you have the people that are watching and listening, they feel more comfortable and they feel more okay with talking about it themselves, or asking for help, or not feeling like there's something wrong with them when you have some of these thoughts or feelings, or if things aren't going well for you too. Because man, there are a lot of times when I'm having like a bad few weeks, and I would hear something that you were talking about, and it would help me get through a moment, because
we're all gonna have bad few weeks, Gino.
We're all gonna have those times, right? And it's been so helpful just knowing that you're not alone, right?
No, that's why I said about the connection piece. I mean, that ends up being the overarching selfish benefit too, right? Like it's good for me to have people reach out about those kind of things too. And so, but I like the show is just, I mean, it's to some degree, it's my own therapy.
Yeah.
And I try to be conscious of like talking about that stuff too much or not enough. And, like I said, in recent years, I've just been doing better. And so I don't really talk about it as much as I used to. But, if I look at the emails I've gotten from listeners over the years of the show, like 20% of them are about horse racing.
Yeah.
80% of them are about life, whether it's theirs, mine, or whatever. And so, and it always cracks me up when people are like, stick to racing. I'm like, well, racing is just the conduit to which we're all, enjoying each other's company and making connections. And of course the game is great. It's mentally stimulating. There's money, there's, family and friends. There's all the great things there's the horses. Like it's all great. But to me, the big thing is it's just this conduit for us to have community, right? Because a
The
lot of
connection.
us, I would argue, maybe didn't have a lot of community at different points of our life.
Yeah. Yeah. And
You know,
honestly, for as negative and as bad as a lot of the social media stuff can be, for how many people that we connected with each other, you and I have never met each other in person.
no,
We've
no,
done a
yeah,
bunch of
you blew
interviews.
that, by the way. I was at Santa
We
Anita
were
with an
set up.
appointment.
We had plans, and I completely blew you off. So yeah,
Yep.
you are a good friend for even coming back to me afterwards. But I mean, I think about like people that I talk with more than anyone.
Oh yeah,
You know, and they're people that I don't see, or that they're hundreds and thousands of miles away. So for a lot of the negativity that there can be, getting to meet all these like-minded people, to
yeah,
find all these people. It's like, I didn't know there were this many people who were like self-deprecating, that liked horse racing, that could
yeah.
like take shots that were funny, that had a good sense, you know. And that's where a lot of us kind of found each other and connected with each other, I think, on Twitter or online. It was maybe even message boards earlier on, before a lot of that.
Yeah.
And as you were pointing out, what's so cool is that the racing has just been like a conduit to take you to all these different places. You, as a baseball fan, now get to go to all these different baseball stadiums when you're kind of traveling around. I love checking out some of the minor league stadiums that you've been to. Give me a couple of your favorites. I went to the Frisco Rough Riders
In Texas.
In Texas,
Yeah.
the one that's got the river out
Yeah.
there, which I absolutely loved. That was a blast. But what are some of the ones that you've hit on that you love? Because minor league stadiums are so fun, and like the events they do to bring you out to the stadium sometimes are a blast.
What's cool here is in Florida that we have the Florida State League, which is single A, but it's usually all like the better players from last year's draft. So we usually every first round guy for the Tigers, the Blue Jays, the Phillies and stuff kind of comes through here. So it's neat to get to watch those. The stadiums are kind of all the same down here. They all have their little nuances and differences and stuff. But yeah, my favorite big league stadium, I think, is Camden Yards in Baltimore. That one's just outstanding.
I just went for the first time when I went to Pimlico, and I love the home run spots in the outfield where they've got all the balls that all the different guys have hit through the years and where they landed.
There's one in Lakeland here, which is kind of halfway between here and Orlando. It's a ways out, but the Tigers do their spring training there, so their single A team plays there. But the right field kind of concourse is a runway, like an airport runway, like in appearance. They're not landing planes there, but it was because that property used to be in World War II where they did jet training. And so like that would be where they would take off and land, was literally right where that it was. So it's kind of fun when you get to see that kind of stuff as well. But mostly baseball was my big thing as a kid, and I very much got away from it from a lot of years. And the pitch clock and some other changes have helped bring me back, but I'm just a lot more invested in it. It feels good because, like, I mean, as a kid, I remember like looking at the back of the sports page to like check the batting averages every day,
every day,
box scores every day.
You knew the numbers that moved up. They were 2 for 4. Everything.
You'd watch Sports Center every day. I mean, they'd replay Sports Center 20 times, and you'd watch it 15 of those times.
And after the 10th, you could have done Sports Center yourself, right? You could recited it in your sleep. You know the highlights that are happening. It's different the way we kind of consume sports now too, right? Like way different nowadays. Just a couple of small things as we finish up here. Very important topic for me, as you know, on former podcasts of mine, I've covered this. Favorite horse racing movie?
Well, I was in one, so I'm a little biased on Lean on Pete, but it's not Pete. But it's not so much a horse racing movie.
We'll take you out of the movies that you've been in, other horse racing movies.
My SAG card.
Yeah.
I mean, Let It Ride's the default,
right?
It is kind of the best. Seabiscuit's like the best made movie of horse racing.
It's really well done.
But I think I like Let It Ride more. I'm trying to,
because the characters, right?
St. Vincent was a fun one, even though it more just had a couple spots at the track. But yeah, like Looney and those type guys, like we all knew those guys.
Yeah,
that's great. The characters are the great part of this. And like you said, when you get to interview different people, and my dad one time, I remember he sat down and wrote down all the nicknames of his friends, and like half of them were racetrack guys, and like they were just hysterical names.
There's always a Fat Tony or like a fat, right? There's always one or two of them.
Big Nose Mark.
Yep, exactly. Right. Big Eddie.
I remember Mark used to have a rule about, he's like, the 2 always wins at Laurel. And there was one day he had a pick 4 and the 2 was 35-1 in the last leg, and he had it. And he only put it in because
it's the 2.
Yeah. And so I text Dave Rodman every once in a while. I go, the 2 always wins at Laurel after a 2 horses won. But no, I mean, it's just Yeah, my dad's bookie was named Foot because he wore a size 16 shoe. I remember seeing him around the races, and yeah,
Oh
like
man.
the characters of those days is well. You know what's really funny is I had a great picture of lawmakers. It was like a helicopter type picture, so like an overhead, and like 50% of the guys were just going no shirt. Like everybody back in the day used to go
Right?
tarps off, and it's like I showed that to a friend. She goes, God, why does everybody have their shirt off? I was like, I don't know. That's kind of what everybody did back then in the summer
Different
in
times.
Seattle.
It was
Yeah.
different times
Just
there.
just let it go.
So
But
you and I are recording this now, June 20th. I think people will hear it maybe a few days after this. So you're not too far off from starting another season coming up at
yeah.
Colonial Downs. Got to be pretty excited for that as you just finished up another year at Tampa. So what's the schedule like for you? You've got the podcast going daily still, and then right now you had a little bit of a break between those two tracks, right?
Yeah, the springtime break is great because it's not as long as my fall break. Because Colonial we finish September 14th, and I think Tampa we don't
This is the
start till
longest meet you're going to have, right, at Colonial coming up.
yeah. Well, since I've been there, yeah, it'll be 41 days. I think it's 10 weeks, 4 days a week, and then there's a Labor Day thrown in to make the 41 days. So yeah, it's up from 27 last year. It's really only an extra week. It's just there's going to be an extra day of race. I think they're going to run 8 races on a few of the days as well. So it's not going to be a ton more racing, but it certainly is more. But yeah, no, I'm leaving. What am I leaving? A week from today's or a week from Friday. So the 27th, I'm going to go to Atlanta to the Braves game, and I'm going to go to Greenville, South Carolina to the Shoeless Joe Jackson Museum.
Awesome.
And then up to Virginia. They usually let me get there a week before to help do some PR and promotion stuff. And then we start July 9th. And Colonial's a lot of fun. It's a great challenge as a race caller because it's a ton of full fields. It's turf. And so it's a rewarding place to get to call races because it's really, I think sometimes if you're at the smaller dirt tracks, it's real easy to kind of get monotonous. You can't take a race off at Colonial.
No.
And even the dirt track is very difficult because they're like running straight at you and it's an over quarter-mile run. And so and then Tampa, we have the color-coded caps. Those save my bacon a lot, but Colonial don't got that. So Colonial, as my mom likes to say, she goes, they make you earn your check there. I was like, you darn right they do.
And before we get out of here too, I want to thank you because when I was having a tough time in my life and I left TVG, which is a place that I thought I was going to be working forever, and I had been there early on.
How many different rumors did you hear about why you left TVG?
Man, a lot. There were a lot.
My favorite was that you were hired by the World Wrestling Federation.
Right? Yeah, that was a good one. That was making the rounds. I had that one. But I was so burned out that like right after I left, I wasn't even on social media very much. Like I was pretty like off for at least a few months. And you were one of the first people that brought me back. Honestly, the first like time I actually told a story about like why I left and a lot of the reasons and what happened was with you on your show. You kind of brought me back to like relevance a little bit and brought me back to sort of getting the itch again to like when I talked with you, I think it, like you were saying, it was very therapeutic for me, kind of getting it out, being able to kind of like almost get past it a little bit. Like now I was a little less bitter after I talked about some of what happened, some of the reasons why I left. And then I was like, okay, now I can get over this now. I can move on. I can get back into it. I had thought forever I was going to be at one place. I wasn't. And you were someone, you and I, we didn't know each other that well. We'd always gotten along like, here and there back and forth, but I really appreciate it, man. Like you kind of woke me back up. Like I remember the conversation that we had and it really got me like focused again and reminded me after, I think it was like 4 or 6 months where I was literally doing nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing. I was at my parents' house doing nothing. I had a little bit of money left from like what I had when I left TVG, but I did not have a ton of money. I was not motivated. I was not myself at all. Yeah. And I did not think I was going to be doing stuff in racing anymore. I was just like, my parents were really fed up with me because I was not myself. Yeah. I was just sitting around all day. And I remember getting the message from you and being like, yep, let's do this. And just thank you because you woke me up when I needed it. And that's what friends are for. And just kind of like what you're talking about, you've had people through the years when you were having tough times, give you support, give you a little bit of help. You did that for me too, man. So I'll always appreciate that.
I love that. Yeah. I think there's very few success stories in life where it's
straight.
Where people didn't have help along the way. Like, we all need opportunities. We all need people to give us a shot. And I've been, it was funny that a week or two ago, Liam Molinaro, who's kind of an aspiring announcer, called over at Gulfstream and somebody messaged me. They're like, why aren't you doing that? I was like, well, I mean, I said, isn't it better to let him? I said,
Yeah.
I've had all my shots to do all this stuff. And I said, I'm exactly where I want to be in my career. Like, let him have a chance to do that. And it's not like I turned it down. I mean, I didn't, and if they'd asked me, I would have done it. But I do think there's something to be said about, yeah, I mean, like we all just kind of need a shot. And, if it doesn't work out, whatever. But yeah, I'm happy to hear that though.
And you've gotten your shots, and it's worked out very well for you so far. He's the voice of Tampa Bay Downs. You're going to hear that voice coming up at Colonial Downs very soon. You hear him on the Jason Beem Horse Racing Podcast 5 days a week, still over on Twin Spires. Anything else? 4 days a week.
Yeah, we cut Fridays. Okay. I wasn't getting a day off.
You need that.
Yeah. Monday
through
Thursday.
What else do we got to plug for you? Anything else you want to mention before we get out of here?
I think that's it.
Man, and I love how you don't shy away from any of the serious topics. That's so, it just is great to be able to have the honest back and forth conversation. Really looking forward to putting this conversation out. I think a lot of people will enjoy it. People that may not have known you, or maybe they hear your voice a little bit and maybe they're not someone who listens to your podcast all the time. I think we probably converted some listeners over there for the Jason Beem Horse Racing Podcast. So thank you so much, buddy. Enjoy the next few weeks that you still have off, and we'll be listening to you coming up at Colonial real soon.
Yeah, I'm heading to the beach right when we finish recording here, Gino. A little staycation this weekend.
Beautiful. So hope you enjoy, and thanks to everyone for listening in. We'll have our outro, and we'll kind of wrap everything up here in just a minute. Thanks so much for joining us on the Off the Track podcast. We'll have another episode coming out shortly. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and download the podcast anywhere you get your podcasts.